If you enjoy this video, please remember to like and subscribe, and if you would like to support the channel on Patreon or PayPal, the links are listed below. John Carpenter has always been a filmmaker who has always been on the outer of conventional cinema, and even after the enormous success of Halloween, he would not bow to the Hollywood system. His unique style and dark tone would carry on in the follow-up after Halloween, called The Fog, which was not well received at all. For his following film, Escape from New York in 1981, he would step away from the horror genre and make an action sci-fi film set in the dystopian future of 1997, where Manhattan Island is walled off and turned into a maximum security prison. While traveling to a political summit, Air Force One is hijacked by a group of insurgents before crashing onto the island of Manhattan. The President of the United States escapes in an escape pod, landing right in the middle of the island. War hero and ex-soldier Snake Plissken, turned criminal, is given just 24 hours to go in and rescue the President of the United States. If he is successful, he will receive a full pardon for his crimes. Escape from New York was in fact Carpenter's very first screenplay out of film school. Along with his film school buddy, Nick Castle, he would revise and rewrite the screenplay.
I first wrote the screenplay in the mid-70s, during the time of Watergate, when Nixon was rounded out of office, basically, because he was involved in a burglary. The whole feeling in the nation was one of real cynicism about our president. I wrote the screenplay, and no studio wanted to make it. They all said, well, you know, we've beaten up on the president enough. We can't have this kind of dark view.
Carpenter would draw inspiration from the 1962 sci-fi novel, Planet of the Damned, by Harry Harrison, about a man named Brian Brand, who is forced to leave his home planet of Anvar and goes to the hellish planet called Dis to prevent a global nuclear holocaust. During a trip to Manhattan, John Carpenter became even more inspired in writing his screenplay when he saw the seedier parts of New York City. He saw the city as kind of a jungle, and he wanted to make a science fiction film along these lines. Originally, Carpenter was approached by Avco Embassy to make a film based on a novel, a time travel thriller called The Philadelphia Experiment. He instead proposed to Avco Embassy his idea for Escape from New York. They loved the idea and greenlit the project almost immediately. International film investors agreed to provide about 50% of the budget, with Goldcrest Films signing a co-financing deal with Avco. Carpenter was given a budget of $7 million, which was the largest budget he had been given at the time. However, the budget was still tight for such an ambitious film like Escape from New York.
A studio that did that, they really wanted to get in business with him. They say, what else do you got? So he went to the trunk, pulled out this, kind of pitched them the general idea without, saying that they had the script complete, and they loved it, So then he called me. He said, Nick, I really need another set of eyes and ears on this one. Would you be willing to come up and, talk? We'll just come up, have fun, sit around his pool, and we'll talk about, flesh this thing out, put a little bit of humor in it. And, I think he knew what I could bring to it probably. So that's what we did. We just had fun trying to think of where Snake should go in New York. Well, you got to have a taxi ride. You have to go to Madison Square Garden. You got to do this. You got to do that. And then, forming it, coming up with some nihilistic ending.
As far as casting, John Carpenter was looking for a specific actor to play Snake Plissken. Avco Embassy Pictures wanted him to cast more seasoned actors, like Charles Bronson, but he considered Bronson too old to play the role. The studio approached many actors for the role of Snake, including Jeff Bridges, Nick Nolte, Tommy Lee Jones, and even Chuck Norris. But there was only one actor Carpenter had in mind for Snake Plissken, and that was Kurt Russell. The studio fought Carpenter on his choice, but he was adamant it had to be Kurt Russell. Carpenter had already directed Russell 2 years earlier in the TV movie biopic Elvis in 1979, and Carpenter remembered how great he got along with him. In fact, Carpenter had pitched the idea of Snake Plissken to Kurt Russell during the production of Elvis. The studio saw his choice as a big risk due to Kurt Russell being an ex-child actor for Walt Disney in films like The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes in 1969. Russell was desperate to star in Escape from New York and was very keen to take on the role of Snake Plissken to shake off his squeaky clean image.
Kurt had mentioned to me that what he wanted to do was a part where he's not nice, where he doesn't care about anybody, where he is almost a bad guy. He wanted to play somebody incredibly cynical. He wanted to play somebody really hard. So I thought, you know what? He would be great in this. If he can play Elvis, he can play this character of Snake Plissken, this kind of outlaw in the future. So I mentioned it to the studio that I wanted Kurt Russell to star in it, and they were shocked. And they said, well, he's a Disney actor.
The studio finally agreed to cast Russell in the role.
I convinced them that Kurt could be an action star, and it worked out.
Kurt Russell turned out to be the perfect choice as badass Snake Plissken, a role which he stated as being the favorite of all his films.
This was fun because I got to work with John so closely in creating a character that I think is probably certainly the most iconic character I've ever played. So it was an opportunity to to do stuff like that and create a character that really didn't have any social redeeming values.
Carpenter would envision the character as a renegade anti-hero. Snake Plissken's eye patch was in fact a suggestion by Kurt Russell during production. Russell would get in shape and started a rigorous diet and exercise program to develop a lean and muscular build. Escape from New York would feature a great supporting cast, with Carpenter movie regulars, with Adrienne Barbeau as Maggie, which was a character perfectly written with Barbeau in mind. Adrienne Barbeau and John Carpenter were married at the time the film was released. Other Carpenter regulars included Charles Cyphers, Tom Akins as Captain Remy. Remy is in fact a reference to the then president of Avco Embassy Pictures at the time, Robert Remy. The opening narration in the film was voiced by Jamie Lee Curtis, who had starred in the Carpenter films Halloween and The Fog. Other frequent Carpenter collaborators cast in the film included Nancy Stevens as the hijacker of Air Force One. Donald Pleasance was cast as President John Harker. Pleasance, of course, had worked with Carpenter on Halloween in 1978. The movie featured some of the biggest names in films, including Lee Van Cleef as Police Commissioner, Bob Hawke, Ernest Borgnine as Cabby, which was a character written originally with Mickey Rooney in mind. Soul singer Isaac Hayes plays the Duke, with the legendary Harry Dean Stanton as Harold Brain Hellman. Susan Hubley, Kurt Russell's then wife, appeared in the small role of Girl. Her character was originally named Maureen, which was revealed in the tie-in novel, never in the movie. She would receive a special appearance credit during the opening titles. Deborah Hill and Larry J. Franco would serve as the producers of the film. For the film setting, it proved to be difficult for Carpenter, who needed to create a semi-destroyed and decaying version of New York City on a very small budget. Shooting in New York was out of the question because it had to look like a destroyed city, so production designer Joe Alves would suggest to shoot on a movie backlot, but Carpenter wanted the setting to look real and grimy, so they sent their location manager, Barry Bernardi, to take a trip cross-country to find the worst city in America. He found the perfect location, East St. Louis, Missouri, which had that seedy, rundown quality of New York City to it. The reason for this rundown look was that in 1976 there was a massive urban fire which left parts of the city, block after block, as rubble, with all the buildings burnt out and empty for 3 to 4 blocks. Cinema photography for the film was done by Dean Cundy, who had collaborated with Carpenter 3 times prior. During the shoot, he would introduce a computerized light modulator, which he and Joy Brown had invented and built. With the modulator, Cundy was able to mimic the light patterns of fire instead of relying on actual fire during photography. Using the Paraglide image stabilizer rig, he would create smooth moving camera shots. The film was shot from August to November of 1980 and was the largest film production John Carpenter and Deborah Hill had ever worked on. The production design department would get their props by filling several dump trucks from the local landfills and covering the set with junk like broken refrigerators and car shells. Carpenter would in fact have to shoot most of the film at night, from 9 p.m. to 6 a.m.
We had to do it very efficiently, and we had to do it with a big scale. We shot at night. We wet the streets down so it reflected the lights, and the town let us shut off all the electricity for blocks and blocks and blocks, and we lit the city. So basically what you've got is this shell, an empty city with a lot of bonfires and rubble in the street.
John Carpenter wanted to create 2 very distinct looks for the movie. One was to create a police state that was high-tech with gadgets and underground computers. The high-tech society was a lot easier to shoot compared to the low-tech world of Manhattan Island Prison. It was a tough and demanding shoot for Carpenter. For 2.5 months, he would almost never see daylight. Carpenter and his crew convinced St. Louis authorities to shut off the electricity for 10 blocks at night, which gave Carpenter plenty of freedom. Additional shots were filmed in Atlanta, Georgia for the unused subway scene, with various interior scenes shot on sound stages around Los Angeles. Dick Warlock was Kurt Russell's stunt double. George Wilbur was also listed as one of the stuntmen. In Halloween 2, written by John Carpenter, Warlock would play Michael Myers, while Wilbur would go on to play Michael Myers in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. In Escape from New York, Carpenter originally conceived a scene where Hawk reveals that the explosive charges in his neck were a hoax intended to force Snake to rescue the president, but decided not to use this plot device. Carpenter would use a similar plot device in the sequel, Escape from LA in 1996. Escape from New York was in fact the first film shot on Liberty Island, beneath the Statue of Liberty. These were the only scenes of the film shot in New York City. Lee Van Cleef shot all his scenes for just one night, flying back to Los Angeles the very next day. Unfortunately, some of the close-up scenes shot of Van Cleef were out of focus, so Carpenter was forced to use some of the close-ups in the movie, as they couldn't afford to get the actor back. Special effects were an important component in the movie. Wireframe animations were used for the landing target on the World Trade Center and surrounding buildings. High-tech computer graphics were very expensive, even for a simple animation. A model of New York City was built. This model city set was repainted and reused for the movie Blade Runner in 1982. Interesting to note that the matte paintings used in Escape from New York were rendered by James Cameron, who was at the time a special effects artist for Roger Corman's New World Picture Studios. Cameron would also act as one of the directors of photography on the film. The shot of Maggie's dead body under the Duke's car was added after principal photography, as John Carpenter felt the audience wouldn't get it that she had been killed by the impact. Carpenter and Adrienne Barbeau filmed the shot in their garage with her under their own car. 2 months after principal photography, the editing, scoring, and mixing and ongoing visual effects work was completed at Roger Corman's Venice, California studio. A number of scenes had to be deleted, including the opening Colorado bank robbery sequence. The scene was also deleted, partly due to the original negative. Carpenter explained that after they screened the rough cut, they realised that the movie didn't really start until Snake got to New York City. The exciting synth score was composed and created by John Carpenter, and I have to say, it's one of his best soundtracks. The studio released Escape from New York on July 10th of 1981, with the film grossing $25.2 million at the box office, being one of John Carpenter's biggest hits of his film career, outdoing such box office hits of 1981 like the James Bond movie For Your Eyes Only, which had the much higher budget of $28 million. Escape from New York ended up grossing more than 4 times its budget. The film even scored well with the critics. The 1980s would become Carpenter's most productive decade. The main posters for the film would feature a fallen Statue of Liberty. This design concept has been copied and used in a number of films over the past 3 decades, including The Jupiter Menace in 1982, The Day After Tomorrow in 2004, and Cloverfield in 2008. Escape from New York would even inspire a colourful Italian ripoff titled 1990, The Bronx Warriors. Carpenter and Russell would return to Snake Plissken years later with the 1996 sequel Escape from LA, which was actually more of a funnier send-up of Escape from New York. A Marvel comic was released in January of 1997 titled The Adventures of Snake Plissken. The story would take place sometime between Escape from New York and before his Cleveland escape, which was mentioned in Escape from LA. There was even a popular video game inspired by Escape from New York, released in 2001, titled Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty, which includes a character by the name of Solid Snake, who is obviously a reference to Snake Plissken. In 2003, CrossGen published a 4-part comic book miniseries titled John Carpenter's Snake Plissken Chronicles. Also, Boom Studios published a comic book, with the first issue of the series released on December the 3rd of 2014, with the story picking up after the end of the film. Not only that, but Boom released a crossover comics miniseries featuring Snake and Jack Burton in a Big Trouble in Little China Escape from New York crossover in October of 2016. Director John Carpenter, to me, was a cut above the rest, as directors go, and his rule-breaking way of filmmaking certainly gives Hollywood the finger, which is what I love about him. Escape from New York is no exception, with its nihilistic approach and view of the future, and with its badass anti-hero, Snake Plissken. It makes for a truly iconic film. The question is, should this film be remade? I don't know. I think it can stand on its own without a remake. And who could play Snake Plissken as perfect as our beloved Kurt Russell? No one. My name's Jonathan. Thanks for watching.